Storytelling is one of our oldest human traditions, something that's bonded us together as families and tribes and societies. I've always thought to be a successful entrepreneur, you need to be a good storyteller. Our speaker today, Kirsten Holmberg, probably agrees with that. Kirsten points out that most of us would like to be, need to be, better at public speaking. And thankfully, that's a skill that can be learned. Kirsten helps entrepreneurs and business owners improve their public messaging and their pitches by helping them hone their communication skills to deliver clear, compelling, and confident messages. She has 20 years of experience working with Fortune 50 companies, brand new startups, and everything in between. The owner of Platform LLC, on the board of Global Shapers and TEDx Boise, a writer and author, Kirsten not only coaches and mentors entrepreneurs, but also delivers online courses, workshops, and keynotes to enthused audiences. Today, Kirsten will be telling us how to pitch with excellence, public speaking insights for entrepreneurs. I give you Kirsten Holmberg.
As an entrepreneur, you've undoubtedly heard many stories about companies like yours being funded. But you've probably never heard the story of Dr. Fox. Dr. Fox was invited to present at a conference for psychology professionals. He was introduced to his audience as an expert in his field, someone who had authored books and written journal articles. And the audience gave his presentation rave reviews. And they were an audience comprised of his fellow psychology practitioners. In reality, though, Dr. Fox was merely an actor. He had read a single article on his subject matter, but he presented in a way that was warm and engaging, and the audience loved him for it. Those unwitting audience members were part of a study that had been constructed to determine whether presenters were rated highly more because of their presentation style and personality than on the true content of their subject matter. In this case, presentation style clearly won out. That study proves that expertise can only take you so far. As the expert in your field and as the spokesperson for your business, improving your communication skills will better position you for success. You need effective communication skills to win customers and clients and to secure suppliers. You need those same skills to solicit the right people to be part of your advisory team. You need effective communication skills in social settings when you just might make that connection that could be exactly what your business needs right now. And you most definitely need effective communication skills when you are pitching for funding. Our time together today is designed to equip you with a 3-step process for developing and delivering an effective pitch. One of the biggest mistakes I see entrepreneurs make in developing their pitch is beginning with a deck. Instead, I want you to begin developing your pitch by crafting the content first. It's a mistake to start with a template because templates only tell you what elements to include. They don't tell you how to create a narrative, how to tell the story of your business in a way that engages. If you start with a template, you're going to end up fitting your pitch to the template when really it should be the other way around. The narrative, the story is what should drive the deck. Now, you might think that stories don't belong in a pitch, but I like to challenge that assumption and teach you today how to leverage it on your own pitch. Your audience is human. They may genuinely be intimidating as investors, but they are human. And what we know about the human brain is that it responds differently when it hears a story. Functional MRI studies show that more parts of the brain light up when people hear a story. The same information can be being related, but the brain engages differently, lighting up other regions and lighting up more intensely. This means that your potential investor is more engaged in your pitch if you frame it in a story. Even data is easier to swallow when it is framed in a story narrative. It's like that proverbial spoonful of sugar, making the data go down more easily. The bonus of crafting your pitch in the form of a story means that you also will remember it more easily, which is a boon if you are prone to get anxious and might forget where you are in your story and in your pitch. That story becomes the thread that connects all of your slides. In TED language, we call this the through line. Without a story, your slides really aren't connected by anything more than a click and a pause, after which you begin reciting what's on the next slide. But the story that you're telling should be the story of a successful investment. So how do we tell a story in a pitch? We're going to use the 3-act structure. And I'm going to ask you to actually write it out, or at least outline it. The 3-act structure was first described by Aristotle, and you have witnessed it in virtually every play and every movie you've ever watched. It has stood the test of time because it works. In the 3-act structure, Act 1 introduces us to the main character. It sets up the context for the rest of the story. We learn a little bit about the character's life, and generally, we discover that he or she has a problem. A crisis is introduced in Act 1. Act 2 is the bulk of the story. Here, the tension builds and reaches its peak. The character works to overcome the problem and the challenges. And then in Act 3, that action begins to resolve, leading us to the happily ever after, the resolution. To apply the 3-act structure to a pitch means that you'll use Act 1 to tell us about the main character, personified by your customer, the person whose problem you're solving. And you'll talk about the context of their lives, the industry that you operate within. You'll introduce us to the pain or the problem that your business solves. And I want you to be sure that you tell us how you became acquainted with that pain point or that problem. You're setting up the rest of the story and leading us to your business idea. Some tips for Act 1 include that I want you to make sure that your character is vivid, because a story about everyone is a story about no one. You need to be sure that that character's problem, the trouble that they're in, is first of all compelling, it hooks our attention, that it is easily understood. Please take the time to learn how to describe the problem you're solving concisely and clearly. And your problem also needs to be relatable to the audience. Find the common ground with your investors. Plus, here in Act 1, you're also going to make sure that you tell us how many people are like that main character. Are there a lot of people who struggle similarly? And more importantly, are they willing to pay to have their problem solved? This is where you're establishing the size of your market. In Act 2, the tension is building. You're going to tell us about the idea that you had to solve that problem. You're going to show us the challenges surrounding that for that character, such as timing and competition. But maybe you have a secret weapon in the form of some underlying magic or an industry pioneer that's on your team. Some tips for Act 2 include, first of all, letting the action unfold for the audience, your investors, in a way that is logical. If you've ever read a book or seen a movie that had a huge plot gap, you know what it's like to have important information left out or told out of sequence. You need to stand far enough back from your narrative to see how it hangs together for someone hearing it for the very first time. Secondly, I want you to anticipate the objections and questions your investors might have. Be sure you address those in your pitch. Don't hide your challenges. They're part of the story and they demonstrate resilience and skill. Plus, if investors can see where you've made mistakes already, then they know that you're not going to waste their money learning that lesson. And third, talk a little bit about what's at stake. What happens if the world has to live without your idea? Stakes are extremely compelling in the story narrative. In Act 3, you're going to bring the story to a close by casting a vision for the future. The ending of your story must implicitly and explicitly show how the investor makes his or her money back. That's the happily ever after. I want you to show how the problem resolves and plays out through your roadmap, the traction that you already have, and how you plan to expand. Leave your investor with a picture of the world that's better because of your idea and the way you've solved that problem or pain. But be sure you show that you've done it profitably. Now, I want to point out a few common mistakes that I observe in pitches as it relates to content. Mistake number one is not tailoring your content to the audience. Once you've crafted this content, but before you deliver it to an investor or at a pitch competition, I want you to revisit that content through the eyes of the specific investor that you'll be presenting to. Take the time to research him or her. Do you need to emphasize different aspects of your story in light of that investor's particular portfolio, or to address questions that you know that they are likely to ask? Make sure that you've made the appropriate adjustments to your content. Mistake number two is telling your story with a lot of insider language. In your industry, you have vocabulary that is specific to your field. Now, your investors have heard pitches from all across industries, and they are savvy, intelligent people. But don't make them work any harder to decode what you're saying. Be sure that you've looked at your content, identified words that are specific to your field, and replace that with accessible language. That way they can stay with you without having to try to reinterpret what you're saying in their own words. Now let's turn our attention to developing your slide deck. But it's not quite time to open the slide software just yet. Before you start with the slide software, I want you to simply grab a stack of sticky notes and that draft that you've written out. Go through the draft line by line and evaluate where are the places in your content that you need to show something on screen in order to help the audience, the investors, better understand what you're saying. What will need visual support in your content? On a sticky note, I just want you to sketch out what you'd want to put there on screen so that they could better understand it or understand it more quickly. And then just slap that sticky note on your draft as you continue to process through it. You don't need to be an artist, but I really want you to try to be a visual thinker here. Think about how you can reinforce or illustrate what you are saying visually so that they understand it better and faster. Now, when you open the slide software, you're going to really easily be able to align your slides, your slide deck, to the narrative instead of vice versa. You'll simply create a slide for each of the sticky notes that you have attached to your draft. Now, this also ensures that you won't have any more slides than is necessary, nor any fewer. The deck will support your story. There are a multitude of places where you can obtain pitch deck templates. So for that reason, I want to simply highlight some of the best practices and pitfalls that you should try to avoid. Best practice number one, I want you to open with a summary slide. In conventional public speaking, one tries to build to a big reveal at the end, culminating in information at the end of a presentation. But in pitching, we're going to take a cue from pitching to executives, talking to executives, and we want to front load the most important information. So instead of a title slide, what I want to have on screen behind you when you begin is a slide that reveals the high-level details of your ask. You could still have your company name and maybe even your own name on it. But if you provide those high-level details about your ask, then your investor has context within which they can evaluate that ask. The content of your pitch effectively just makes the case for that initial ask. Best practice number two, I want you to embed a one-sentence description of your business onto that same first slide. You need to be able to describe your business in a single sentence, to express the essence of what it is that you do so that others can easily understand it. Having that also on the first line provides context again for your investor. Best practice number 3, find a fresh looking template and adjust it to reflect your branding, colors, and fonts. Stale PowerPoint templates, not picking on PowerPoint, stale templates really convey non-verbally that your idea is stale. And stale ideas just don't get funded. So root out something that looks fresh and current. Mistake number 1 is cluttered slides. This is the result of trying to make your slides say too much. Each slide should have a single purpose and a single message. Only what is necessary to convey that message should be on that slide. More slides is preferable to cluttered slides. You want the message of your slide to be clear immediately to your audience. So that means you're going to aim for a lot of white space on the slide, using few words in large font if you even have text on the slide. Use contrasting color or different shapes to point out what is most important to draw your audience's attention to that element on your slide. Test your slide on someone who doesn't know your industry and hasn't heard your presentation. Ask them to look at it and see what they assume you're trying to convey about that slide. If they can't get there in a few seconds, you probably need to start again. And if this proves to be too big of a challenge, pull in a designer. The time and energy and money that you would spend working with someone who's a professional at communicating visually would be well worth it. Mistake number 2, using animations and fancy slide transitions. These are generally just distracting and are very prone to lag and technological disruption. This is even truer when you're pitching online, because then you're subject to bandwidth. When those things create a lag, it just brings your pitch to a screeching halt. So instead, just use clean, simple, straightforward transitions. It'll be more impressive that way. In a related note, video poses a similar problem due to bandwidth or even just processing speed. So instead of including video in your pitch, I want you to just clip the important images out of that video and put those on your slide instead. You can always point someone to a video at a later time. Mistake number 3 applies specifically to virtual pitching, but it's putting important information where it can be eclipsed by the selfie window. If you are pitching virtually, I want you to be aware of what your host is going to use as your video platform. You need to become familiar with that platform and open a test meeting, share your screen, and see where that selfie window defaults to, where that video window defaults to. Knowing that will help you determine where to put the most important information so that it doesn't get eclipsed by that video window. Now, you don't have any control over whether someone on the other side of the screen moves that window somewhere else, but you can at least optimize your presentation for the default position. In Zoom, that's the upper right-hand corner. Mistake number 4 is ending with a thank you slide. Now, I definitely want you to say thank you. After all, you should be grateful that someone has given you the time and attention to hear your pitch. But it doesn't need to be on screen. Instead, I want you to leverage the recency principle of timing by showing them the most compelling slide and leaving that on screen while they're asking you questions. That powerful slide should convey a compelling reason to invest in your company. Likely, that's going to be a summary slide that recaps the exit information. Now, of course, you can embed your website or your email address onto that slide, but in most cases, they already have that information or can very easily get it. With a clear narrative in hand and a slide deck that supports it, we can now turn our attention to polishing your presentation. Management consultant Summers White says that 90% of how well a talk will go is determined before the speaker steps on stage. Now, certainly that's true of crafting your content and developing your deck, but it specifically applies to polishing your presentation in the form of rehearsing. My rule of thumb for rehearsal is that you're actually going to spend about 1/3 of your time in each of those 3 phases. 1/3 in crafting your content, 1/3 in developing your deck, and 1/3 in rehearsing. That means that however much time you spend in those first two phases really should be a guide for you in terms of how much time you're going to spend rehearsing. After all, your presentation is only going to be as good or as effective as you are in delivering it. Secondly, I recommend that you block time on your calendar to practice at least once a day when you're actively pitching. If you don't have a meeting with an investor on the docket, then you can reduce that to about once a week. But you shouldn't ever completely put it on the back burner. You need to stay fluent in it because you don't know when the next opportunity is going to come up. Go through it at least once a week. If you can arrange to have a colleague watch your rehearsal, that would be even better. Having an audience, even someone that you know and appreciate, will create just a little bit of stress in your rehearsal. You'll get better at delivering your pitch with that adrenaline coursing through your veins. If you don't practice coping with stress while you present, you will never actually get better at presenting under stress. Third, I want you to try to capture video of your rehearsal. Watch the playback to identify areas that need improvement. I've included a rubric to help you know what to look for. But you're going to use that footage two ways. The first way is to watch it with the sound off. See what you notice about your body language and your facial expression. What are you communicating non-verbally? Do you have any bad habits that maybe need to work on eradicating? But you'll probably identify something that you want to work on. And seeing it on video is the most effective way to know. The second way you're going to use that footage is actually by looking away from the footage and just listening. Listening for words that you use too repetitively. Listening for the pace of your speech. Are you speaking too quickly? Or maybe you're not even audible. Set that phone or whatever recording device you're going to use far enough away as though it were another person. That's how you'll test whether or not they can hear you. Fourth, I want someone to time you, marking the amount of time you spend on each slide, as well as telling you the total duration of your presentation. Now, you won't spend equivalent amounts of time on each slide, but by having timestamps for each slide, you will better know where you're spending the lion's share of your time if you are consistently running long. That'll tell you that that's where you focus your streamlining efforts to try to condense the content and reduce the time if that's what's necessary. And fifth, I want you to know your opening cold. If you are prone to any sort of public speaking anxiety, having those first few sentences written out and in your memory bank will help you get started while the adrenaline abates and leaves your body. And similarly, again, back to that recency principle of timing, I want those last few sentences to be really well-crafted sentences. And I want you to know them by memory too. That way, if you get a little bit off course or kind of fumble at some point during your presentation, you know that you can stick the landing with a really strong close. Don't make that close just an abject, thanks for your time. Leave them with a really compelling couple of sentences and thank them before you get there. My additional pro tip as it relates to rehearsing is I want you to actually capture audio recordings every time you rehearse. This is an easy way to keep track of how long your pitch has become, but it has the additional benefit of when you have a recording that goes particularly well, one that you probably would like to replicate, save that recording and then listen to it later as part of rehearsing. You could listen to it every day. I suggest that my clients actually listen to it on their commute drive, assuming that's more than just a trip downstairs, or to listen to it at night when their brain is particularly receptive to learning. The day of your pitch arrives, and now it's time to stand and deliver. There are three things that I want you to hold in mind when it comes to delivery. Being able to do each of these three things will help you with the most common challenges speakers have. The first is I want you to be mindful of your posture. Plant your feet firmly Keep your weight evenly distributed and then stack your hips and your shoulders over your feet. By keeping your shoulders back, your rib cage can fully expand, which lets you get the full breath you need to manage anxiety, to keep your voice from shaking, and to oxygenate your brain for cognitive capacity. Plus, it communicates confidence nonverbally. Now, if you're presenting from a seated position, I want you to mimic that same posture. Keep both feet on the ground, but scoot all the way forward to the front edge of your chair. That way you can stack your hips and your shoulders without having to think too hard about it. That'll give you the same erect posture that gives you the full breaths and communicates confidence. Next, I want you to think about projecting your voice. When you are presenting, you need to be mindful that the people in the room can hear you. Again, you're only as effective as you are audible. Those full breaths will help you project. In virtual pitching, and when you have a microphone, you don't have to think quite as much about projecting. That becomes the job of your audiovisual equipment. But I do want to mention here that using a wired microphone will always be a better sound quality and less prone to technology problems than your computer microphone or any Bluetooth operated apparatus. If you're going to wear the earbuds in order to tap into using the microphone that came with the earbuds that came with your phone, then you can consider threading those wires up through your shirt before plugging them into your ears. That just eliminates the visual distraction and looks a little bit more professional. Third, I want you to think about eye contact. Eye contact establishes the connection between you and your audience. It becomes the channel through which your content is delivered. My recommendation is that you make eye contact with someone in your audience and complete that thought or complete a sentence before you shift your gaze to someone else in the room. Not only does eye contact establish that connection, it also can help you, if you are prone to some anxiety about public speaking, to reframe public speaking into a series of small, one-sentence conversations that take place one-on-one. Making eye contact in virtual presentations is a little bit more challenging, as most of you have likely observed in all of the Zoom meetings that you've been attending of late. People often become distracted by their own video in the selfie window, or they get so engrossed in their slides that they forget to look up and make eye contact with the camera. To remedy that, I have a few possible strategies that you can employ when you're pitching. First, you can just place a sticky note up near the camera on your computer or your webcam and just remind yourself with an arrow and say, "Look here." Maybe you can completely eclipse the selfie window so you don't even see yourself at all. But if neither of those options prove effective, at least move your speaker notes and move your selfie window as close to the camera as possible. That'll help bring your vision into closer alignment for your audience. Now, I want to leave you with just a few more tips related to your physical environment if you're going to be pitching online. First of all, please raise the height of your machine. Use every book in your home to get that camera up to eye level. Be sure you're illuminated from the front. Can't be backlit and expect to make a great connection with your audience. Plus, I also want you to run a test meeting, capture some video, and see what it is you look like when you're presenting in the space you'll be presenting from. Are there any visual distractions that are going to be taxing on your audience? Do you have a plant growing out of your head? Fix those things before you get online to pitch. And then, if you can, I want you to conduct your pitch in a room that has some sound baffling apparatus in it. Most of us don't have these professional tools at our disposal. So just choosing a room that has soft surfaces, carpets, drapes, furniture that is upholstered, or even bringing the comforter and pillows in from your bed if you're pitching from home. It just helps to offset the echo. Now, I trust that I've made the case for you to invest the time and energy into developing a great, effective pitch. If you still have the smallest modicum of doubt, take it from Warren Buffett, who said, if you can't communicate and talk to other people and get across your ideas, you're giving up your potential. Now, as an entrepreneur who's ready to pitch, you have invested too much in your business, time away from your family, personal savings, hours of sleep to give up your potential. Don't fail yourself and your business by not being able to share your venture with others in a clear and compelling way. You made a business plan. Now make a plan to communicate it well.